Okay, Tov. Moadim l'simcha. Today's daf is daf Zion. In Makkah says we learn for Achenu kol beis Yisrael and Sunnah Basar v'Shivya. Says the Mishnah, Misha Nigmar. The Mishnah near the top of the page. Misha Nigmar Dino, person whose verdict was already rendered, a Baruch, and he escaped. He escaped after the verdict was rendered against him. Let's say that he was sentenced to death. And then he returned. He first fled, and then he returned to the same bezin. Ain't sosinus dino. They cannot rejudge the case. He cannot be tried again. You don't say, well, he came back, let's start all over again. You don't do that. We'll see where this applies. Whenever two witnesses get up and say, V'yomin, they say, we could testify about this guy, Yankel, Shenigmar Dino Bebezin Shel Ploni, that we testify that Yankel was sentenced to death at this and this court, let's say the court in Lud, Uploni Edav, and these two fellas, Reuben and Shimon, were the Edom who testified against him, and there was a verdict of death. Hareze Harag, he'll be killed, meaning that's good enough, meaning that they're testifying that this guy Yankel was sentenced to death at this and this court, and he was sentenced and he was testified against by these two witnesses. He was sentenced to death. Obviously, he ran away, and we're testifying again. We're telling you what took place at that court. You can kill him based on that. Sanhedrin, no Haggis Baritz of Chutzlaritz. You can have a Sanhedrin in Chutzlaritz. We'll see as long as they were ordained in Eretz Yisrael. He had to be ordained. Today we can't have really Rabbanim because the line of succession of you had to be ordained by somebody who was ordained all the way back to Moshe's time, and that line was broken. So we don't really have ordained rabbis today. They're called rabbis, but they're not really Rabbanim. They can't be judges. So if they were ordained in Eretz Yisrael, they could even judge in Chutz La'aretz. So a Sanhedrin that executes somebody once in 7 years, once in a Shemitah, the cross is called the destructive bezin. In other words, as we saw before, it says v'shaftu eid v'tzilu eid. You should do everything you can to get him off to defend this person. And if a bezin kills somebody even once in 7 years, that's considered a destructive bezin because they should have been more careful and probably try to get him off the hook. Once in 70 years. That means once in 70 years is good, or once in 70 years is bad. We'll see. That's a go to Shal and the Gemara. These two great rabbis, Rav Tafna Akiva said, Ilu ha'inu b'Sanhedrin, had we been on the Sanhedrin, nobody would have ever been killed. Because we can always find some way to interrogate the witnesses and show that they can't really testify. We'll see for example, what that means. If you do that, you're going to be so careful, you'll never execute anybody. And if you don't execute anybody, you're just going to increase the murderers, because murderers will know they get off the hook. If Rav Akiva and Rav Tarfon would be on the bezin and it would have never killed any criminal, then what happens then? Then criminals run rampant, and there'll be more murders in our stories, as we said. Deterrence. Pardon? No deterrence. Yeah, no deterrence. But the point is that I said this before, that the bezdin who executed somebody right after he was sentenced, he was executed. They didn't have death row. People say, look, the fact that there's death row and people can be killed, the rate of murder has not gone down. You know, even though there's capital punishment, that's not true, because they're not really killed. If they would be killed as soon as they'd be sentenced to death, then maybe the murder rate would go down. The Gemara says, Mishnah said, if a person was sentenced to death and he escaped, then he came back before that court. Let me just.
I can't hear you. What?
Let me just.
Now that you're going on to learning, could I
haven't done that in a while. Let's see.
I'm sorry.
Mute all. Yeah, no, we haven't had to do that in a long time. Okay, I think we got them all now. Okay, they're all muted now. Yeah. All right. So the Mishnah said that if he escaped and he came back to that court, we don't retry the case just because he came back now. So if they also bezin, who ain't sosin? You don't retry it in front of that same court. But let's say he appears in another court. In one court he was sentenced to death. He escaped. Then he showed up in a court somewhere else in Beersheba, let's say. Then mashma that you would. you would retry the case. But why would that be the case? So Tani Sefer, we said, whenever two people get up and say, two witnesses say, listen, we could testify that Yankel here, Nigmar Dina Bebezdin Ploni, he was sentenced to death, let's say in Lud, and these two guys were his witnesses, Reuben and Shimon. You can kill him based on that. So at one point you say it's mashma that if he escaped and ran to another court, he could be retried. On the other hand, you just said that if Adam come along and say in one court that he was tried in that court over there and he was sentenced to death, you kill him based on that. So which one is it? From the first case, it's mashma only if he escaped and returned to the same court, then he is not retried. But if he returned to another court, let's say he was tried in Lud and he was sentenced to death there, then he ran away to Beersheba, you could retry him there. But on the other hand, you say that if two people come to a court in Beersheba and say he was tried in Lud and he was sentenced to death there, then you kill him. Why do you kill him? You should retry him. So we're talking about two different cases. One is in Israel, one is in Chutz La'aretz. The time Rav Yehuda ben Yomi explains, Baruch Meretz Chutz La'aretz, if he escaped from Eretz Yisrael to Chutz La'aretz, ain't sosin estino. In other words, we don't reverse his case, we don't retry his case, even in another court. Even in another court, we don't try his case. So ain't sosin estino does not mean ain't sosin estino in this court, but in another court we do it. Even though the Mishnah said if we return to the same court, we don't retry his case. The truth is, even in another court in Eretz Yisrael, maybe you would. But if he escaped to Chutz La'aretz, we don't retry his case. And he would be sent, if somebody could testify that he was sentenced to death in Lud, and now let's say he's in Alexandria, and he escaped there, and we don't retry his case, and we would kill him based on the testimony of the two witnesses who testified to what took place in Lud. But if he escaped from Chutz La'aretz, he was sentenced to death in Chutz La'aretz. Why? Because you had a Sanhedrin there in Chutz La'aretz that was judged, that was ordained by in Eretz Yisrael, and he escaped Eretz Yisrael. So soon as then we do reverse his case, or at least we retry it. Because of the merit of Eretz Yisrael, because he came to Eretz Yisrael, maybe you'll be zochet to find some excuse to get him off the hook. Find him some excuse. So therefore, the Mishnah is not exactly the way it reads. We say if he comes back to the same court, ain't so soon as well, yeah. The same court in Eretz Yisrael or the same court in Chutz La'aretz, you wouldn't change it. But if he escaped from Chutz La'aretz and he escaped and he went to Eretz Yisrael, then maybe you would be Soser as Din. And this that we say that if two people testified about it, we don't, that's only if he's in the same place. But if he went from Chutz La'aretz to Eretz Yisrael, maybe we would reverse it. Sanhedrin no egas. Sanhedrin says we applies in Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. How do we know that there's a court even in Chutz La'aretz? This should be for you ordinances of a judgment for generations. For generations, even when you won't be in Eretz Yisrael, there'll be a court there. Why did it say bisharecha? Right? Shaftim b'shotim shitencha b'chol sha'arecha in your gates. In Eretz Yisrael, in your gates, you should set up courts in each region, each district, and each every city. When you're in Chutz La'aretz, you must set up a court in each and every district, but you don't have to have it in every city. In every single city doesn't have to have a court. Of course, the courts in the Sanhedrin can only work. You need a court of 23, we learned, a Sanhedrin Katana. You need a court of 23 to judge a capital case, but they can only function when the big court, Sanhedrin Gadola, the court of 71 in the Lishkas HaGosses, if that's in service. In other words, when the court of 71 in Eretz Yisrael, in Yerushalayim, is in session, or not necessarily in session, but it's working, it's functional, then you can have a court anywhere. So he said a Sanhedrin kills once in 7 years is considered chablanis, it's considered a destructive one. And then he added on, the Blessed Messiah said even once in 7 years. So what does it mean? Even once in 7 years is considered a destructive court? Maybe no. Once in 70 years is okay. More than once in 70 years, twice in 70 years, that would be considered no good. Teku. So it's not clear exactly what a Blazer Ben Azariah means. Excuse me. Ilu hayinu, had we been there, right? Had we been there, nobody would have ever been killed. What would they have done? Two people come in and say that Reuben killed Shimon. And they saw him kill Shimon. What would they have done to get Shimon off, to get Reuven off the hook? They would say, are you sure that the man was fully, had all his organs, everything in place? Maybe he was a treifa. Maybe he was a man who was within a year of death because he was missing or had a cut organ or something of that sort, something that would kill him. He was a treifa. Like an animal, it could be a treifa. What does an animal treifa mean? That he had some that puncture in the lung or puncture in one of the vital organs that would have caused him to die within a year. Here too, if you kill a treifa, a man who's a treifa, you're not chayiv misa for that because he's considered like a dead man walking because he's doomed to death. He's on his deathbed effectively anyway. So how do you know? Maybe he was a treifa. You killed a guy. You saw somebody shoot somebody or knife somebody. Maybe he was already a treifa. Even if you say that you checked afterwards, you checked all his organs, and there was no other wound save for the sword or the knife. Yeah, but maybe where the sword or the knife punctured him, maybe there was already a hole there. Now you can't tell because it's in the same spot. Maybe how do you know that you killed a fully 100% healthy person? Maybe he was dead. Maybe he was already dead. Maybe he had a wound that you couldn't see, that you couldn't tell. How do you know? Today you'd say maybe he had some other disease that's unknown. Maybe he had some sort of a tumor, and he had some sort of a tumor that he was definitely going to die from. How do you know that? So if you could check it, fine. But let's say even if you check him now and you say there's no other, they did a post-mortem and they found it to be 100% fine. Yes, but maybe where the wound went in, maybe he was punctured over there already. That's how they got him. But how would they talk about an erva? If they saw a man committing adultery or incest with somebody, and they saw them, they witnesses, and they warned him and everything. And how could you get him off the hook? How could Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi get him off the hook? Did you actually see the man's genitals entering him, like the example is given, the brush or the stick in the tube? Did you actually see that? It's very hard to see that. Even when you see two people copulating, you can't really see that. So if you didn't see that, well, we don't know for sure that they committed adultery, and Reb Tarfon and Rabbi Kiva would get him off of Rabbanan, who don't hold you have to be that particular hechidai. How do they judge? After all, most people, even if you see two people in the act, you really can't see. You can't see the genitals within one another. The answer is Kishmul Damar Shmuel. The menafim, when it comes to adulterers, Mishir Menafim, as long as they're in the right position, so to speak. You can tell when they're in the act. That's good enough. You didn't actually have to see his aver entering her. And that ends the first parak.
Interesting the use of the word Sanhedrin, because it's not the Sanhedrin that kills, it's the Bezdin of 23.
Sanhedrin Kana.
That's what they call the Sanhedrin.
Sanhedrin Gedolah, Sanhedrin Ketana. Yeah, Bezdin of 23 is called Sanhedrin Ketana. We learned that in Sanhedrin. Yeah.
Why do you call it Kana and not Katan?
Because maybe the plural Sanhedriot. I don't know. There's a lot of, when it comes to Zachar in a cave, it's very hard to figure out things. Yeah. Maybe it's a namesake, yeah. Maybe it's Sanhedrin Katan. No, I think it's Sanhedrin Ketana, yeah. All right. Eilena Golan says the now we know who goes into Golas. There are 6 cities of Golas, 3 in Eretz Yisrael proper and 3 in Ever Yarden, as it's described in Vaschanan. But there's other parts of the Torah which talk about Golas. What does Golas mean? They go into exile. A murderer who killed somebody b'shogeg inadvertently, he's entitled to find refuge in these cities, Ari Mikot, the cities of refuge, and the Goel Adam, the next of kin of the deceased, has no right to kill him. Now, we're going to talk about cases which are inadvertent. Really, what does it mean, inadvertent? There could be shogeg karav lamezid, and he should have been really more careful. That's if he didn't check his weapon properly. He didn't realize that there was still one bullet in the chamber. He thought it was empty. That's considered rashlanut. Even though he didn't mean to kill, that would be considered karav lamezid, and he wouldn't have the option of going to a city of refuge. And the Goel Adam would not be killed if he killed him. If the Goel Adam killed him in a case like that, he wouldn't be killed. And then there's other cases of inadvertence, which is almost an accident, as we'll see. Many cases, it's an accident. There was no intent there. Not only does shogeg means inadvertently with no intent, but he should have been more careful. And there are cases when he couldn't have been more careful. So Eilan Golim, who goes into Golas? Horig Nefesh B'Shgaga. He killed somebody inadvertently. What do we mean? But now he explains what does it mean. We'll go into the details of what inadvertence is, but first we're going to describe how he has to kill him. He has to kill him in a downward motion. If it's an upward motion, it's learned on a pasuk. The pasuk says, "Vayipol olav," and it fell down. So let's say he was on the roof and he was using a roller to paint or to put some cement. Sometimes Rav says that they used to have flat roofs like we have here in some places in Israel, right? A lot of people have flat roofs. So they used to want to make a slope so that the rain would run off and wouldn't sit there. So they would build up like some cement and use a roller to make this slope. So he used a roller, he was rolling. While he rolled on his downward motion, the roller fell off and killed somebody. By mistake, it slipped out of his hand. Bargas and killed him. Or he was lowering a barrel. And as he lowered it, it fell down and he slipped. Should have been more careful, but he didn't mean to kill him. And killed him. Or he was going down a ladder. The man was lowering himself. He was going down the ladder. And he fell off the ladder. That's a case of going into goals. That was inadvertent. He didn't mean to kill somebody. Should have been more careful, but it was in a downward motion. Let's say he was pulling the roller up. He wasn't, as a roller, you roll it down, you roll it up. Let's say he was pulling it to himself, and then it fell out, or in these cases, he wouldn't go into Golas. He was lifting up the chavis, the barrel, and the rope broke, and it fell on him, and killed him. Or you were climbing the ladder. You were climbing the ladder of Nafalav and he fell off the ladder and killed him. It doesn't go. This is considered shogeg karav la'ones because he wasn't considered. He was on his way up. He wasn't even going down, and he fell down. He went up again. Went against gravity. Not he fell down. He wasn't in the direction of going down. Doesn't go into go. Zaklal. Here's the general rule. So if it's on his way down, goes into goal. So if it's not on the way down, he doesn't go into goal. How do we know that? He fell on him. The way down. It's got to be from there. The action that he's doing, or if he himself fell, has to be on the way down, not on the way up. The pasuk says in Bamidbar, in that one parsha, it says bishgaga. Bishgaga means pratlamezid, excluding if he did it intentionally with full knowledge. Bivli das, without knowledge. What does it mean? Pratlameskaven, excluding if he didn't have intent. What's the difference between Mezid and Miskaven? We'll see. Mezid and Miskaven can be the same thing, but each pasuk, since there's Bishgaga, Prat Lamezid, and Bivli Das, Prat Miskaven, each is coming to exclude something else. We'll see what that is. Mezid, Pshita. Obviously, if you did it on purpose, why would you say he can go into Golas? Barktoli, he's supposed to be executed. Amarava, Ema Pratla Omer Mutter. Means this, if he thought it's mutter, for some reason he thought it's mutter to kill this guy. Maybe he thought that the guy deserved death, or he thought he was a goy, whatever it was, he thought it was mutter to kill him, then he doesn't go, because that's korov lemezid. Even though it's an accident, it was inadvertent in the sense that he didn't mean to murder, but he thought he's allowed to kill this guy. That's a lot of problem. If that's mutter, onasu. If he thought it's mutter, that's considered like an accident. I thought I was allowed to do that. That's korov lemezid. Again, korov lemezid means that it's like Mazid. It's almost like Mazid. Maybe he's not going to be killed for it. For some reason, he thought it was mutter to kill this guy. But he doesn't have the option, the refuge of going to the city of refuge. That's not going to save him here. Bivli das, without knowledge, Pat Miskavan, excluding if he had intent. Miskavan again, if he had intent to kill him, Shita, Barktol again, he should be executed. Amarabba, problem Miskavan, Laragas Abem, Laragas Adam, means this. Excluding if he intended to kill an animal and by mistake he killed a person. So here again, he should have been more careful. Again, he killed him b'vli das, prat l'maskaven. Here he intended to kill, just intended to kill somebody else or an animal. L'kuti vargazah, he meant to kill a goy, killed a Jew. L'nefil vargazah ben kamek. He meant to kill a baby that was not viable, that was going to die anyway, and he's not chayiv for that, and he killed a ben kayama. In those cases, that's Karav Lamezid, and he doesn't have the option of going into Golus. Tanar Banim. Pasuk is im befesa, if suddenly. What does it mean? Prat l'karen zavis, excluding a corner, meaning this. Fesa, Rashi means, not only means suddenly, but it means right next to him. So again, he killed him. He should have been more careful, excluding a corner. Let's say two people were approaching a corner, one from one street, one from another street. Neither one could see the other. Guy's walking with his knife, and he's walking on the street. And then at the corner, he didn't see this guy. The guy just came out of nowhere. There's always two places. Either he came out of nowhere or out of the blue. There's these two famous places, right? Came out of nowhere and he hit him there. Then that's an accident. That's an accident. So that's not
Shouldn't be
carrying a knife. Yeah, but let's say he
Not that way.
he should have been more careful, but that's considered, he couldn't have anticipated it. That's the point. If you're right next to him, you see him, you should be more careful. You see people there, don't go right next to him. Below Ava without hatred or without malicious intent, prat l'sonei. If he hates him, not off the hook. That's Karav Lamezid. It doesn't get off the hook there. Because then we could assume, well, don't say it was an accident or inadvertent. If you know, it was well known these guys hated each other, then he doesn't get off the hadafo, shadachfo, begufo, even if he hit him with his body. In other words, he didn't use a knife or an axe or some other weapon, just pushed him with his body. Also, he'd be chayiv golus. If he pushed him, he didn't mean it was an inadvertent. Oish lechalav, or he threw something at him. What does that mean? Lahavi yarida shitzar chaliyah. To include, he was on his way down, but necessary to go up. We'll give an example of that mean. What does that mean? Yerida shitzar chaliyah. Sometimes you go down in order to go up, right? Like you take a step in order to climb on something, you push your foot down in order to get some traction and go up. So he says, you know what? Lahavi yerida shitzar chaliyah. In other words, even though you're on your way up, but if you was a downward motion, you're chayiv for that too. Below tzliya without trying to ambush him, again, means Belotzi wasn't intending, excluding a case where he was trying to go in one direction and it went in the other direction. That's considered an accident, and he's potter. Bashir Lotzada, right? It was a Pratna Maskava and Lizrok Shnayim Zarakar. Again, he wanted to throw something, he was throwing a rock, he was trying to hit something 2 meters away or 2 amas away, and he threw it 4. Again, that's considered an accident, and excluding those cases. In those cases, he wouldn't go into Golus. Maybe because it says Vasher Lotzada, he didn't. Prat Maskavan, in other words, Prat Maskavan Tzadzev Achol Tzadzer. In those cases, he wouldn't go into Golus, either because it's Karav Lamezer or because it's Karav Laones. But either way, the difference is if it's Karav Laones, the Goel Dam is not entitled to kill him. And if it's Karav Lamezid, then the Goel Dam would be entitled to kill him. But in both cases, he wouldn't be allowed to go into Golus. So that's what he means here. Asher Lo Tzada, what is Asher Lo Tzada? He didn't intend to kill him. Prat L'Meskaven L'Tzad Zeh V'Chazeh, or Asher Lo Tzada, Prat L'Meskaven L'Zork Shnayim V'Zork Arba, then in a case like that, he wouldn't be able to go into Golus. V'Ashiyavo El Reo Ba'Yar, where he came into he hit his, in other words, the person who committed the murder, again, we call that accidentally or inadvertently, met him in a forest. Just like they both had permission to be, a forest and generally is public property, both had permission to be there. Any place in other words, if it's a public area, then they both had permission to be there. And he killed him inadvertently, not in the cases we said where it's Karav Lamezid or Karav Laones, but he pushed him or he hit him by accident. He didn't mean to, but he didn't mean to kill this guy, but he killed him. Again, he might have meant to kill, if he meant to kill somebody else, like a goy or a child or a non-viable child, or killing an animal, then that's Karav Lamezid. He should have been more careful. He doesn't go into Golus there. But in any case, he didn't mean to kill this guy, but he killed him. So excluding Rashi explains, let's say it's the mazik's own yard. Let's say I'm shooting arrows. I'm target. I'm what's called target practice. I'm target practice in my own yard. And this guy showed up. I didn't know he's coming. He had no permission to be there. Again, that would be an ones, and I wouldn't have to go into Golus there. Let's say a guy was climbing on a ladder. v'nishman hashliba mitachtav, and the rung broke or fell out underneath him. As I was climbing the ladder, the rung fell down. The rung killed him. Rung fell. Now I was on my way up. We say on your way up, it's considered excellent. You don't have to go into Golas. V'nafla v'hargamau. Yahai gavna aliyah hi or Yerida. Is that considered aliyah? And I would not have to go into also Yerida, or I would have to go into Golas. Amalei karnagas. You've already touched, but Yerida sheetzarach aliyah. You're already talking about a case of Yerida which is sarach aliyah, which we said before. Yerida sheetzarach aliyah. Even though I'm intending to go up, but right now my action, that motion is a downward action, and that would go into Golas. That's considered I killed him in a downward fashion. Esvei. Klal, this is a general rule. Mishnah said, the last words of the Mishnah were Klal, Gola. If it's on the way down, you go into Golas. You don't go into Golas, that's considered like an accident. What is to include what? What do you mean? He's on his way up. Doesn't mean to say this case where you're climbing up a ladder and the rung broke as you push down on it. And it's mashmash, that's shelo b'derech yudaso, and the chay should be potter. So why do you say you're chayvul tamech? But according to your reasoning, what is the other way? The Mishnah says kol b'derech yudaso. What does that include? What does that include? If that means if that's shelo b'derech yudaso is pushing down on a rung of a ladder, what is yuderech yudaso? What does that include? The answer is it depends. We're really talking about generally a butcher who's chopping meat, and it could depend on how he does it. Let's say a katsav. You're talking about a katsav. Why? What do we mean by that? That there's different ways of action. That if you're on your way up, you're potter from Golas. If you're on your way down, you're not. The Tanya. Katsav, a butcher was butchering, was chopping meat. Tanachada, one brisa said, Lefan of Chayev. If he killed somebody by mistake in front of him, he's Chayev lachor potter. If the guy's behind him, then he's potter. Tanya, another brisa says the reverse. La'achra of Chayev. If he killed the guy behind him, he's Chayev. Chayiv Golas means, of course, Lefanov means he's in the front of his potter, which is the reverse. How does that make sense? We'll see. Tanyich, another bride says, Bein Lefanov, Bein La'achar Chayiv. Either in front of more, he's Chayiv either way. How can he be Chayiv either way? This also contradicts the first two brises. Tanyich, a fourth brisa contradicts all of them and says, Bein Lefanov, Bein La'achar Potter. You're potter in all cases. How does that work? Below Kash. Kan Yerida Shalafanov Aliyah Shalachra. Oh, where do you say that he's Chayiv in front of him? If the guy that he killed was in front of him and he killed him on his way down, meaning sometimes you pick up a chopper or a knife or whatever, an axe, and you go like this, right? You go down and you want to, let's say you're trying to throw an axe up there. So you go down like this and then you're throwing it up, or the reverse. Maybe you're coming from above and then as your swing takes you behind you, right? So you're coming, you could be going up and you could be going down. There could be a downward motion up, a downward motion behind you, downward motion in front of you. It could be an upward motion in front of you or an upward motion behind you. So that's what he means over here. If Yerida was in front of him, then he's chayev, and aliyah sha'achrav is potter. The other ones where in front of him, he was on his way up, meaning I picked up this axe or whatever, and this guy was in front of me, and I killed him while I was in an upward motion. But then if he was behind me, it would be on a downward motion already because I was on my way up and then on my way down, or reverse. I could have been on my way down behind me and then killed him up going this way. Whichever was, makes a difference which was first and which was last. The key is, was it a downward motion or upward motion? So if he killed him on a downward motion in front of him, chayev. If he killed him on a downward motion behind him, he's chayev there. On an upward motion, either way, you're potter. And it can't be reader shalafanov, or let's say it was a downward motion both in front and in back, either a downward motion in front of him or a downward motion behind him. Chayev golas can't be shalafanov, or if it was an upward motion in front of him or behind him, then he'd be potter. So that's what we mean in the Mishnah. But this idea that we said, if you killed him by you're climbing a ladder and the rung broke and killed him, we said that's a downward motion on your way up. You're doing it because you're trying to climb, but it was actually a downward. When your foot hit the rung, it was a downward motion. Maybe it's a machlokas and we have here, it says, you are climbing a ladder, and the rung fell out, slipped out, or broke below you. One bride says you're chai, one says you're potter. Why? My lava commits machlokas. Marsav Yeridi, one says that's considered going down, therefore your chayv goes. Marsav Ali, one says no, it's an upward motion because you're climbing, and therefore you should be potter. It's low. Kulam aliyah. Everybody disagrees with what we said before. That everybody says it's an upward motion because otherwise why would you be potter? Below kasha, kanlan azakim, kanlan golas. For damages, if they're hurting somebody, a person is mu'id la'olam, even if it's an accident. If I killed somebody, if I hurt somebody, damaged somebody's property, even if it was by accident, I'm chayiv. So that's what he means. You're chayiv for damages, but to go into goals for killing him, be potter because it was an aliyah, it was a derech aliyah. But for damages, I'm chayiv even then. Yeah, iboy seima hava goals. Both we're talking about goals. Lo kashem. Was the wrong was it decayed, right? Or it had worms in it, whatever it means, it was decayed or not. If it was wormy, right, then even though it was an upward motion, you're chayav. Why? Because you should have anticipated it. That's already karav l'mezid, right? It says it's karav l'mezid. Chayav shekol shliva, Rashi says, shesliya shedosla nechvefes li l'mat goes on. V'yiridahi v'im lo esliya ein kan yerida. In other words, this is not even not because you're chayav because it's an aliyah. Because since the rung is already decayed, falling apart, right? The wood is falling apart. Let's say there's worms in it, whatever. When you're starting on it, it's going to go down. So that's definitely yerida. If it's not wormy, if it's a strong rung, there's no yerida at all. You're climbing the rung. You're climbing it. You're stepping on the rung to climb up the ladder. You're on your way up. It's only a yerida if the rung is dilapidated or decayed and it's going to fall down. That's yerida. In both cases, the rung was not dilapidated or decayed. Automatic or automatic? Is it fitting? Does it fit tightly into the ladder, or does it not fit tightly into the ladder? If it doesn't fit tightly into the ladder, then it's definitely going to fall out. When you step on it, it's going to fall down. That's considered yerida, not aliyah. If it's strong, then it's an aliyah. So you could say that everybody in these prices holds that it's an aliyah. Yeah, yeah.
What if somebody shoots somebody and there's a decay in the trajectory going down? So what would that be considered?
Okay, so if we're talking, let's say he shot him in a public area and he didn't mean to kill somebody, but that would probably be considered. If we're going to talk about that case, the next case, if let's say throwing a rock into Rosh Hashanah, you go into goals there because he should have anticipated you're going to kill somebody. That's the point. Now, if we said before, if you were taking target practice in your own yard and the guy shouldn't have been there, that would be an accident. But if you shot somebody, that you should have anticipated you could kill him. It's like throwing a rock into the street. That's going to be the next Mishnah, not the next Mishnah, the Mishnah on tomorrow's Daf. The next Mishnah we're going to say right now. Nishman abarzol migatam. Now, when are you chayiv? When is the pasuk? What does the pasuk mean? Does the pasuk mean that the axe head, the metal part, fell off the handle, or does it mean that when you chop the wood, when you were chopping wood, a piece splintered off from the thing that you were chopping, and that splinter went off and killed somebody? That's a machlok between Rebbe and the Chacham we're going to see now. Nishman abarzol mikato. If the axe head fell off, slipped off the handle, Rebbe Omer, you don't go to Golas for that. That's not the case of Golas, because that is probably more karav l'mezid. You should have anticipated that. You should have checked your axe before you started chopping. I'm saying that that's what the pasuk's speaking about. V'nishpat habarzel mina eitz, is that's what the pasuk's speaking about, right? Mina eitz hamisbaka. If it splintered off, if what killed the guy was a piece of wood that splintered off where you were chopping, Rebbe says that's when you go into goals. That's what the pasuk lechamram ain't a gola. Why? Because the pasuk says v'nishma. We'll see. Tanya Amar Mlem Rabbi Elchamim v'chinemer v'noshal abarzol me'etzo. Does the pasuk say you chacham say you think that what? That what's the pasuk speaking about? He goes to the golas where the barzel fell off the eitz, fell off the axe handle. Doesn't say v'lo nemer ela mina etz. Pasuk says. He was trying to cut down wood. And the barzel fell off. The Chum say nashal barzel min etz means it fell off the handle, right? So it doesn't say that. It doesn't say me'etz, so it says min ha'etz. It says what fell off. And nashal, as we'll see, nashal barzel mean that the barzel caused a piece of wood to fly off where you were cutting. And that's what it means. It says it's from the wood, not from the handle, but from the wood that you were chopping. But it also this same pasuk says lichros eitz. You were trying to chop wood. We're talking about the same wood, not from the handle. According to you, lichros eitz means the wood you're chopping, and nashal barzel min eitz means the handle. It says no, they're both talking about the same thing. Ma eitz amalamala mina eitz amisbaka. Just like this, lichros eitz means the eitz that you are chopping, right? Af eitz amalamata mina eitz amisbaka from the eitz that you are chopping. Amrav Chia Barashi Amarav. Ushnei mikra chadash. They both are the same pasuk. Pasuk is v'nashal barzal mina eitz. The pasuk we just quoted. What does that mean? Rabbi Saviesh Lam he reads it as v'nishal. In other words, it says v'nashal, but you could read it as nishal. So he says v'nishal means as it chopped piece of wood off. V'nishal barzal means the barzal caused the piece of wood to splinter off the let's say the log that you were cutting, that you were chopping. A piece flew off. Don't read it as v'nishal, but read it as v'nashal, and that means v'nashal is it slipped off. The barzal slipped off the handle. Does Rabbi Yeshlam Saras relate? Does Rabbi really hold that you read it the way the pasuk is written, not the way it's read? From Rabbi Yitzchak Bar Yosef, Rabbi Yochanan, the top of Ches. Rabbi Yehuda ben Roetz, Rabbi Shammai, Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Kiva Kulisfield. We have this Gemara in Sanhedrin. Yeshem Lemikra. They all hold Yeshem Lemikra. This includes Rabbi. So how can you say he holds Yeshem Lemsaurus? So Hainu the Kamil Va'od. Says right. Even if you go with Yeshem Lemikra the way I normally read it, you could say Yeshem Lemsaurus, and therefore we're talking about the eights that was chopped off, not the handle. But also, even if we hold the Yeshem Lemikra, but here we have Xavier Shava. It says eights here, it says eights 4 words later. It's the same eights. But that's why he said, look at the Xavier Shava. Xavier teaches you that we're talking about what killed him was not the barzel, not the axe head, but rather the splinter from the log. Amar Papa, man to shut a piece of ladika. If a man threw a clod of earth at a tree, palm tree, v'asar tamre, and a piece of the palm tree, a fruit from the palm tree, a date or whatever, fell off, azal, and killed him. Vazal tamre v'kato, but machlokes Rabbi Rabbanan. That's machlokes Rabbi Rabbanan. According to Rabbanan, you'd be potter, because the Rabbanan say what killed him was the axe head, the clod. Then there's the thing that flew off his own koach. According to Rabbi, no, it's the splinter that fell off. And here the dates that fell off that killed him was like the splinter. Isn't that obvious? This is not the same. In the case of Rebbe's talking about where the axe head hit the log and then the splinter flew off, that was like the direct power of the attacker, of the person chopping. But over here, it's you threw the clod at the tree, and then the date got knocked off. That's already kocho. That's already like a secondary strength. And maybe that would be potter. Kamashma, it's the same thing. So what's the case of koch kocha? The Rebbe would say you're potter on that. You're potter from gal seichem mishkachla. Going on the shata pisa, you threw a clod. Hit a branch. The branch went. The branch went and hit a cluster of dates. Then the dates fell off. And it was killed by that. That's already koach kocho. He threw a clod. The clod hit the branch. The branch hit the cluster, the branch or the stem went and hit the cluster, then it killed him. That's already called kocho, and it would be considered like an accident, and you'd be potter from Golas. But the first case, Rebbe would say, if you threw the clod at the tree and hit the dates, and the dates fell down, according to Rebbe, that would be exactly like the case of the splinter from the log killing somebody. That would be considered kocho. Not kocha, it'd be considered kocha and be chayiv. According to Rabbanan, your potter, because according to Rabbanan, they learn that it's not the ricochet or the splinter that flew off the log that killed him, but it's rather the axe head that killed him. All right, we'll pick it from here tomorrow for the Mishnah Mitzvah Hashem. Have a good day, everybody.